Who would win in a fight, a trillion lions or the sun?
Oh man, I'm thinking a trillion lions would bake up pretty quickly in the sun, so I'm going to go with the sun.
Yeah. Yeah, my money's on the sun, but honestly, a trillion lions kind of a lot.
My name is Jeff Irving, and this is the Exploring Vrahode podcast. I'm the creator of the Vrahode game system, and in this podcast, we're going to do a deep dive into the lore and gameplay of Vrahode. I'm joined by Brandon Rollins. Hey, Brandon.
Hey, everybody.
Who will be acting as a stand-in for you, asking many of the questions you might be curious about yourself. Brandon, what's the topic for today?
Wait a minute, stand in?
I know.
You see the funny.
I think moderator is better. Moderator,
Okay,
maybe?
yeah, I'll be a moderator. I'll be like Chris Wallace or something.
I like it.
All right,
Chris
so
Wallace.
that's a deep cut. All right, so I think the natural first topic we should cover is probably what actually is Vrahode. And so obviously you told me that it's a bunch of things all at once. You know, it's the world in which these creatures live in. It's a game system that people can kind of take and riff off of and create their own stuff. And of course, it's a Kickstarter campaign coming in. We're thinking end of 2023. So, I mean, already that's a lot. I say, let's just start with what is Vrahode, the world, the universe itself.
Okay.
So I know that's a bit of a loaded question. So it's like, first, let's just start with this. What is Vrahode like? What games does it resemble?
What games does it resemble? I have to say, if Gloomhaven and HeroQuest had a baby in an art gallery, which was subsequently adopted by Shadows of Brimstone and ISS Vanguard, that's probably what we're looking at here.
Okay, so that's already a pretty intense family lineage right there.
Yeah, right. But no, I mean, Vrahode, obviously, I'm a college kid. I'd played every damn game out there. I'd read all these fantasy books, and everything was the same. And I was so tired of, okay, I have to roll up a half-elven mage now so that I can save the village of Bree from a red dragon. And that makes a lot of sense. And obviously the most beautiful girl in the village has been taken up to the mountain by said dragon, and that it's my job to do it. You know, go fix the situation. I was tired of it. So Vrahode, the world, kind of came out of my initial desire to write some books. But I found out in the journey of gaming, I'd gamed a ton, started adult life, having kids, and said, hey, someday when my kids are grown, I'm going to write these books. I'm going to write these novels. I'm going to be that guy, the great American novel. But I did a lot of writing and I became a graphic designer in my adult life. And I just found out that writing really wasn't that fun. It wasn't. I labored over it. I stressed over every word. I had a constant devil on my shoulder saying, you suck. You're terrible. Cash it in and, find a day job. Well, I had a day job, but I couldn't get the words to flow like I wanted. And so over the years, I continued to game. I love gaming. And I just never made the connection until I'm like, hey, wait a second. I don't want to write these books. I want to take this epic 3 or 4 novel story arc and invite a lot of talented people in to help me make this into something that's more interactive, where I can invite, instead of just someone to read a book, it's great. And the mind's eye has so much power to finish what a writer starts, right? But I wanted more. I wanted more interaction. I wanted people to be immersed in this world enough that they were the heroes. And that's basically kind of where Vrahode evolved over the years and became this kind of huge board game series.
Yeah, and you say you've been working on this since 1990? That's when the idea came.
What are you trying to do? What are you trying to do, Brandon? You think I'm old? You think I'm old? You trying to take a poke at me?
Oh no, I've already gone off the rails. This has gone off the rails. Quit the show. You know what?
Yeah.
That's it. I'm fired.
Next moderator, please.
Next moderator. But yeah, you've been refining this for a while. Like you've had these ideas in your head, and it's just been over time you've filled in more of the details of the world and started to understand like who the characters are and how they fit into the world and what
Yeah.
the geography of it looks like and all that kind of stuff. And see, that's neat because honestly, when you just immediately look at the world, one thing that stands out and one thing that you've actually emphasized to me quite a lot is that it's not it's not the same old like kobolds and orcs kind of thing. It is
No.
genuinely brand new kind of fantasy world. This is a totally different kind of world. It doesn't even have a northwest, south, and east. There are different compass directions. There are
Yeah.
planets and suns and moons that are different than what we have, and
Yep.
creatures with their own evolutionary lineages that just don't have anything to do with the fantasy creatures that we so often see.
No, you're absolutely right, and like I said that earlier, that grows out of this desire to kind of get out of the tropes that Tolkien and Gygax. I mean, they did this so eloquently, but it's been so hashed and rehashed through every iteration of fantasy in every genre, not just fantasy novels, but gameplay, board games, RPGs, even collectible card games. It's saturated. I dare someone to try to pick up a collectible card game and it not have demons and undead and dwarves and elves. That's just it. And so while I was in college, I was dreaming this world up, and I had amazing classes. I had classes in anthropology. I had classes in sociology, and I learned about cultures that were isolated in the along the Nile, in South America, that had never had contact with the modern world. And so I started to think about it. I thought, well, why does everything have to be like they've described it? Why can't we just start to think about new races and and new descent patterns within their cultures, and where do they derive their magic from? And so in doing that, I came up with this idea that there are these advanced beings that are essentially the descendants of humanity. And I always loved this concept of how in our world on Earth, humanity and the Fae always had this kind of strained relationship. Did humans at one time have magic like elves, like trolls, like gnomes? And were they welcomed into the Fae? Were they part of the Fae? And so I took that thought process to its logical conclusion that maybe they did. Maybe at some point humanity was part of the Fae, and that they had this potent source of magic, but that over the centuries they slowly lost that and replaced it with technology. And then because we lost that internal magic, we also gained a lot of the negativity of that technology as we went forward as a species. And it ultimately ended up with us losing our magic, losing our connection to the Fae, and having to actually strike out from Earth and find a new world and a new way to recapture the magic that we had lost. And so basically, without giving too much away, I felt like the ultimate bad guy in any fantasy story should be us. And
Yeah,
so I'm gonna stop there because I don't want to give away too much. But I felt like that was the way to do this, is flip everything over on its head. Because what, in normal fantasy stuff, who's the good guy? Well, it's going to be the human fighter, or of
hmm
course his trusty sidekick, the elven archer. No, 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 no.
I think that's interesting because I think I maybe it's Dune that I'm thinking of, but one of the concepts is that it's like really far in the future, and maybe I'm wrong about this. I would honestly have to double check later, but it's like as I recall it, it's set far in the future, and people have just had all these kind of technological collapses since, and people kind of built up interstellar travel, and
Mhm.
instead of using like oil or descendants of oil like kind of energy like that, you rely basically on people who need in their case, spice, drugs in order to do the interstellar travel. But the whole
Yep.
reason it's that way in the first place, and the whole reason there's this imperium and all the weird politics, is because somewhere deep, deep, deep in their history, farther away than the ancient Egyptians are from us, farther away than Mesopotamia is from us, someone screwed up like real bad.
Yeah.
And I think that's an interesting concept to start with. Let me think about how to word this. So yeah, just so listeners know, we actually had an internet disconnect just a moment ago, so you might notice that. But right before we disconnected, I was going to ask, basically, who was it that in the world of Vrahode, in the universe of Vrahode, the lore itself, who was it that actually created the continents and the oceans and the land that creatures dwell on?
Okay. So essentially, there's there's a lot of layers. Ogres are like onions. There's layers.
Oh God, with the
Yeah,
Shrek
but
memes.
so our story, I think the easiest way to approach this is to look at where the story begins. And the story begins at a place on timeline wise on Vrahode where you have these conquistadors, these conquerors, if you will, that have come to Vrahode, and they have, with their own unique magic and their own unique bid for the planet of Vrahode, crafted these 10 races from bits of flora and fauna, the environment, the elements of the world, essentially to create a congregation, if you will, to create worshipers for them.
It kind of mimics the biblical creation myth
It
in that way, wouldn't
it
it?
it it,
Taking the land and crafting the
it
people.
is, but these Akurish, who are the known as the creators by the races, they didn't create the world. They came with essentially their own unique bid to take over this world, and in so doing, their goal was to create their own use their own unique form of magic and craft these races that would ultimately, in their hope, become just congregations of worshipers of them as gods. And again, we talked earlier a little bit about the humanity and the Fae. Well, if the Akurish are our evil descendants, if they are the worst of what we have to offer in existence, then we've sent these folks out into the universe, but we don't do it in a science fiction way. We bump up against science fiction, but we stop at that. We say they came from afar. We don't talk about their spaceships. We talk about them coming and being and arriving, but we don't because this is fantasy. So we talk about the Akurish as coming as our descendants, the worst of us, because we've lost our magic. Well, of course we've lost our magic. You know, all we can do all day long, all of us, is look at our damn phones, right? Well, that we just take that to its logical conclusion.
Mhm.
No magic.
So it's kind of like what the Akurish did. It sounds like is that they initially started out as being quite human-like,
No, they are
and
us. They are us.
they
Yeah, I
are
think
us.
they're us.
Okay, so like metaphorically or literally?
Well, if you believe as I believe that there is truth to myth, there is validity to legend, and that if you go back far enough, I think there's a real good chance that elves and dwarves and trolls and gnomes and leprechauns and humans were all part of the same family, and they all honored the earth, and they all had magic. Well,
Mhm.
things happen. We have falling outs. We replace magic with other things, in our case, technology. And what does that technology do to us? What do we look like at the at the mercy of that technology? Well, it's going
Yeah.
to hurt your physical being. It's going to hurt you as a person physically, because you're basically holding a piece of radiation in your hands, right? And maybe eventually it makes you lose your ability to reproduce, and maybe it costs you your physical strength, and it just kind of diminishes you to this almost to borrow a term from Gary Gygax, maybe it almost makes you lich-like.
Maybe. And like it sounds like these guys just went way too far in
They went
mechanizing things
way
and
too
using
far.
people.
So it's time to leave the Earth, go elsewhere, not by spaceship or whatever, in a fantasy way. They're leaving, they're going somewhere else, they're arriving. And that's kind of how we handle it because ultimately this is a fantasy setting. So we have to kind of make it almost more metaphysical in that way. But yeah, we're there. We are there as the Akurish. We're there to conquer this world and to regain our magic.
So you have these basically flawed gods
Yes.
who created creatures out of just what happened to be
Yeah.
there, and they live themselves, and by the looks of it, in a kind of not just pre-industrial, but perhaps like pre-iron working kind of
Yeah.
age, in which they just, it's stone tools and traveling by ships made of wood and that kind of thing throughout dangerous lands.
Well, the Akurish brought with them this kind of failed magic, which is called the Keere magic. Magic in this world has two facets. It has Ruhl and Keere. Ruhl is the functional magic that the races that were crafted by the Akurish are able to wield. They're able to wield it to do functional things, to help their societies, to help their villages, to help protect their children. And so they have this wonderful Ruhl energy. And the byproduct of the Ruhl energy is just the Keere energy that the Akurish used to craft these 10 races. And so it ends up being this kind of red mist that just drifts away into the soil, and it's forgotten because it does nothing. It has no function, but it is a reality, and it's part of the crafting of these races. But the real power comes in Ruhl. Ruhl is the ability of these 10 crafted races to interact with the world of Vrahode. And that is the potency of the magic in this world is Ruhl. So we've got 6 playable races, and we've got 4 non-playable races. The 6 playable races, you've got the Terreln, which the Terreln were crafted by the Akurish from the forests. And so the magic of the Terreln is of these forest-dwelling creatures that are fairly reclusive, and they interact with trees and wood and roots and dirt every day of their lives. And that is the currency in how their society works, is the rule of the forest. And then you've got the Kautuk. And the Kautuk, basically, the Akurish said, okay, we found these beautiful pronghorns or antelope or whatever. Let's create some sort of sentient being of the plains, of the grassy seas of the world of Vrahode, and of the storms that rage across the plains. And let's make a race crafted from that. And they used their magic, and boom, the Kautuk came into being. And they're these kind of diminutive humanoid forms that are also combined, and they're like little mini centaurs. They're like a human combined with a deer. And their magic is kind of based on that. It's wind, it's pressure, it's lightning, it's storms, it's enhanced movement because of how they were crafted. And then you have the Athakul. And the Athakul, when the Akurish crafted the Athakul, they went into the deep underlands of Vrahode. And they said, we want to bring a being about and use our magic to craft them from the darkness, from the caverns. And so they're kind of bat-like, and they're ugly in appearance, but they have these beautiful little delicate wings that allow them to fly over short distances, to allow them, and their magic is based on the darkness and their own sacrifice of their blood, because they live in one of the harshest climes on Vrahode, which is the Underlands. I mean, things they're evil, they're dark, they're chaotic, they're dangerous. The Underlands are where the Athakul are at home. And so having an Athakul in your party, taking on the Athakul as a hero, you're getting this kind of unique perspective to Vrahode because the Akurish crafted only them from the Underlands. And so that's cool. And so then you go to the swamps and you go to like watery, kind of rivery, marshy coastal areas, and you've got the Drellrune. And the Drellrune are these kind of slick, smooth-skinned, white or light-colored lizards. And I always loved lizard men in D&D as a kid, but I just felt like, hey, there's a lot more culture here than what, Gygax did with the lizard men. So in our world, in Vrahode, there's actually 3 different races of lizard, of reptilian. There's the Drellrune, the Sahrune, and the Juern. And they're all cousins, but each one has a little bit different take on their magic and on the environments or habitats that they are living in. But anyway, the Drellrune, their magic is about water. So everything that they do comes from water and their control of it, and anybody that happens to be in those habitats with them. And then you've got the Mahari. And the Mahari, I think, in my mind, the Akurish set out to kind of marry these top-tier predators, these predatory animals that they found on Vrahode, and to say, how can we make some sort of creature that is smart enough to worship us, but can also kind of embody these top-tier predator behaviors and use that in their magic. And so the Mahari, that is it. That's the way they interact with the world. They watch and observe, and they do so well that they can actually bring to bear in battle the behaviors of these top tier predators, even though they're these little bitty tiny humanoids. I mean, they're probably the closest antecedent we have in the world of Vrahode to elves. And then you've got the Minoc. And the Minoc are kind of like, I always imagine the Minoc kind of like Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit. They're these kind of kindly, elderly, soft-spoken folks with a servant's heart. And all they want to do is provide healing and solace to the people that are hurting. And so they live in these deep, dark fungal forests, which are probably the most dangerous places on Vrahode. But their magic is all about selflessness. It's all about healing. It's all about what they can do to help others live to see another day. And so when you take those 6 races, you've got Terreln, Kautuk, Athakul, Drellrune, Mahari, and Minoc. Those are the 6 playable races. You'll notice there's no humans or dwarves in any of those.
Yeah, it's all brand new stuff.
Yeah.
And what I think is interesting is they all come from very different places, and you can tell just by looking at the art, which I'm going to pop down there in the long form transcript for anybody who wants to look at that. And because they all come from very different places, they all have very different lifestyles and cultures, and they probably don't interact with each other that much.
Well, that's intentional. That's intentional, Brandon. Think about it. Think about it. We're the bad guys. Okay, you and I, we're the bad guys. If we're going to craft races that we want to worship us, what's our biggest worry? That they're going to get together and join forces and say, hey, we don't need them anymore. Mm-hmm. So it's necessary that they're created from these far-flung biomes because we don't want them getting together. We want them staying apart.
Yeah, and I got to imagine that none of them know probably about the Akurish, about how they were created or anything like that. So it's all kind of wonder and speculation for them. And as they eventually, inevitably, as the plot requires, interact, they're probably going to find out some terrible existential stuff that they just really don't want to know, but are going to find out anyway.
Yes, and I think the best way to deliver that is through the most horrifying and appalling and unsettling character in a story, and that is the Shapeless. And the Shapeless is a collection of souls that represent the past failed conquistadors on Vrahode. So if you come to Vrahode with the intention to conquer and you fail, guess what? You become the Shapeless, and you get to serve the new conquistadors that are now there to do their bid to take over to take over the world. And that is the proof that there is a true creator beyond the Akurish, that there is someone, a god that exists, and that the proof of that, the tangible proof of that god in this particular iteration of Vrahode is the Shapeless.
Ugh. Are they kind of, in a sense, pure evil?
Well, I mean, in as far as they are the past conquistadors that failed and ended up being kind of bound into this servitude of kind of being this kind of collection of wraiths and ghosts and spirits. So I wouldn't say pure evil. I would say it's a pretty harsh sentence though.
Yeah.
If
Not good dudes.
if you fail, that's not an outlook you would probably want. Better off to just stay home.
Yeah, probably just stay in bed. So
yeah.
I want to save most of the character stuff for some future episodes because I have so many questions about each of these folks and how they live. And I don't know, I want to dive deeper into that. Yeah, just to let everybody know, we just lost internet connection again. I don't know what it is. This first episode recording, we're cursed or something. Anyway, I was actually going to just suggest that we actually end this one here because there's so much I want to ask about the creatures that I actually think that needs to be another episode or maybe two.
Yeah. Okay. Do I have to do that outro thing?
Yeah, you got to do the outro.
Okay. Thank you for listening to the Exploring Vrahode podcast. If you enjoyed this show, take a moment to subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. If you're an Apple Podcasts, please leave a 5-star review. It helps more than you know. You can learn more about Vrahode on vrahode.com. That's VRAHODE.com. Link in the show notes. And you can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're at Vrahode. Thank you again for listening. We really appreciate it. Keep an eye out for our next episode in 2 weeks.